Hi, it's Ross Waugh here from Waugh Infrastructure Management and InfraManage, and I'm talking to you today about this report here, which was produced for the Ingenium conference in Dunedin in June 2013, Infrastructure Management Forecasting the Changes to 2030. It's a 63-page report, and I've also added some additional content which we'll be looking at over this section and the next session. And at the conference it was very tight scheduling for time, had 20 minutes to produce it. So what I've done is done a series of videos that are on this website, just looking at the content in a little bit more detail, unpacking the concepts a little bit more. So this is the fifth video of 12 or 13, we think, and it's around future implications for infrastructure management for city and district planning. And that's based on the fiscal constraints, it's based on the population changes, and it's also based on demographic changes and new infrastructure changes. And so the first thing that's happening as a result of all these things is that we are getting quite a lot of changes in our cities and towns. The thing about these changes is they're actually happening quite incrementally, so we're not noticing them particularly. With the exception of Auckland, who has just put out a new unitary plan and had in that plan urban intensification with three-storey medium density apartments allowed without notification of neighbours. And that, of course, produced a bit of a backlash up there and a lot of political and media commentary. And I think the current position is that they're just reconsidering that. But it's a symptom of what's happening. What is happening, and you'll see it on the slide here now, is that we are getting an intensification, particularly in our town centres. And we're getting what can be described as, in New Zealand terms, medium density units and not villas. And so if you look at the slide, you can see we've got some units there, and you're getting more of those built. And in this particular picture, which is from an arterial road in Timaru, there's just a whole range of units, and that particular villa is there on its own. And hey, the villa's been looked after. It's got a new roof and it's got a new aluminium window. But the reality is it's in a row of about 6 or 7 units that have replaced previous villas and bungalows, and sooner or later the same thing's going to happen to it. And we look at that and we say to ourselves, it's just units. But the reality is it's medium density intensification, and it's going on all around New Zealand, and it's creating more intensive dwellings for a 1,000 square metre, quarter acre section, whereas there used to be one house, now there's 4, and 4 lots of people living on them, and that has knock-on effects for a whole heap of things. And I think what's happening is this change is occurring, but our thinking around that change and our infrastructure thinking isn't keeping up with it. And so I just wanted to highlight it as part of the report. I've put it in there, and it's just watch that trend. One of the things that is coming as a result of that is we also think there's quite a fundamental possibility for new development layouts, and that's up on the slide there now. And the new development units, we're saying, hey, there will be multiple units per site, as shown in the diagram. Maybe you'll have a central common green area. Rear narrow service lanes down the rear of the sites, which has some consequences for fire and other servicing. If there's storage and garaging, there'll be quite small units down the back of the sites, probably. We think that people living in these sorts of units, because they'll be in centre city, less requirement for cars or smaller town cars, so they'll be driving maybe a little smart car or a little Suzuki Swift or something like that, as opposed to a Holden Commodore or a Falcon. So you've got smaller cars going on. More scooters, mobility scooters, and also petrol or electric scooters, more bicycles, and we think in time far more demand for separate cycle lanes, because cycling in road-marked cycle lanes in New Zealand at the moment is quite hazardous. Motorists really don't look out for cyclists. And if you think about over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been quite a number of high-profile instances of cyclists being killed in motor accidents. Wider footpaths, that's shown in the diagram, traffic calming, narrower carriageways, more use of public transport, and probably more use of second-tier rental markets. And the sort of thing we're thinking about is Uber.com, which is operating in San Francisco, if you want to have a look at what's going on there, or just second-level rental markets for people that maybe only need a car on the weekend type thing. All of those have quite profound effects in the end on how we provision our transportation infrastructure and how we provision our utility infrastructure. And so I just wanted to unpack those a little bit. And we'll start with the fact, are these happening? And when I presented this at the Ingenium conference, somebody came up to me afterwards and said, you're right about that. One of those has already been built in central Nelson. I said, well, how is it? And the person said, well, look, it's pretty good actually, and people are taking it up, and they're not slumming or anything like that. They're quite well built, and they're quite attractive for people to live in. So the first thing is these are happening. The second thing is if you're going to have this, then it changes the dynamic of how you provision them, because at the moment we work on the theory of we can get fire mains and things like that relatively close to houses, and we can get into them. But these sorts of developments, maybe we're going to have to start concentrating on sprinkler systems and a few more alternatives for fire suppression. We're going to have to work on the theory that we've got intensification of drainage and water to multiple dwellings, and just thinking about the whole rest home dynamic that's going on. A lot of them aren't too dissimilar to hospitals, and so from a water provisioning point of view, you'd want to make sure that you've got a decent ring main system, so that if you lose one set of pipes, you're not losing the whole lot to the facility, so multiple feeds into facilities and things like that. Just takes a little bit of thinking. The one of the things around this change, I think, if you like, to a more European type inner city, and last year I was up in the Nordic countries and then in Denmark and Copenhagen, and certainly in Copenhagen they have separate cycleways, separate lighting systems for them, quite constrained carriageways for the roads, and separate pedestrian walkways as well. And I can see that coming, particularly in our centre cities. And so the challenge is, if you're an asset manager and you're in charge of corridor management, is to start thinking of your entire corridor. Don't go replacing your curb and gutter or your curb and channel on existing alignments without thinking about this stuff. Even in Timaru here, we're starting to get traffic calming going on in streets. We're starting to get streets with narrowed carriageways. Just experimenting with these things around the places. Passing bays in urban streets with defined street parking within pedestrian walking bubbles for safer crossing of the street and things like that. And so these things, again, you look at it and go, oh yeah, there's just a few of those happening. But the reality is there's quite a bit of change going on. It's just be aware of those trends. The other thing that's happening overseas, and it hasn't really hit New Zealand currently yet, but certainly in Germany and Holland and parts of the USA, towns are effectively being abandoned. And so in the report, I've given an example of a town there, a lovely little town on a river, and its population's halved in the last 20 years. Due to lack of employment opportunities, and that town is getting close to being abandoned. And this certainly in Holland and the US, they're abandoning towns as well. And so what that means is that the municipal or state government stops providing services, so no public transport. The town becomes a rural address as far as the authorities are concerned. And if people want urban water or urban wastewater or any other previously urban services, they either form a collective and pay for them themselves, or they just provide for their own services. And there's a whole heap of websites that you can go look at around shrinking towns. If you put that into Google, you'll pull up a whole heap of them. There's work going on in the UK around that. And it's really hard. How do you abandon a town? And the thing is, from a infrastructure provision point of view, the minute that you stop providing infrastructure, you're actually hastening the trend that's already started with that town. And in New Zealand, we've got a number of small rural towns that are probably struggling to survive a bit, not many kids moving out. The long-term trend over the next 30 years is for there to be an increasingly aged population. And the reality is, with the modern transportation systems, perhaps the reason for that town existing originally isn't quite there anymore. And I'm sure you can think of a few examples. I'm not going to name any. But what I want to do is, as part of this paper, is just start that debate as to what the level of service provision for those towns is, how can that be sustained within the constricted fiscal arrangements, and are we in fact ever going to get into a situation where we're abandoning towns, and not be sentimental about it. New Zealand, we have abandoned towns before, certainly after the West Coast and Coromandel minerals booms we had quite, and Central Otago as well, we had towns spring up that were subsequently abandoned, and there'd be the odd historic house or a pub, that's all that's left there. So it's not new, but I think in the modern context we struggle to get our head around it a little bit. Finally, and just talking about this part of this report, one of the things as I looked through all the information was that certainly in terms of this change in urban planning and change in population density and quite rapid change in demographics as well, that maybe we should be looking at infrastructure master plans to assist with our planning. Now, if you've got staff from South Africa or from Asia, certainly infrastructure master plans are deployed in those areas, and so those staff would actually have a pretty good idea of what they look like, or able to get hold of examples for you. Napier City Council in New Zealand has essential services plans that they keep regularly updated, and they would be as close as we've got in New Zealand to a best practice example of infrastructure master plan. We certainly had them before. In the 1970s, the Ministry of Works maintained master plans for our major cities around major highway construction. And so they're not a new concept for New Zealand. I just think they're something that's perhaps fallen out of favour a bit in the last 20 or 30 years, something that maybe we need to consider as we look forward in optimising our infrastructure, and also some changes in the way we plan and deliver our towns around a demographic change as well. So that's the end of the first part of this. We're going to close off this one in a second. The second part of this discussion around integrated urban planning, I want to use some examples that I brought back from the Nordic countries last year. So thanks for watching this, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next one. Bye.